All right, we are currently reading Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, 1995 edition. Faustine, hello. Hello, anybody I haven't said hi to. By the way, I know there's people in chat that I forgot to say hi to, but I'm sure you don't mind. Thank you, Uga. You are truly incredible. Alright. Someone campaigning for mod of the month. Well, I think Uga wins that every month. No offense to other mods, just Uga's so extra. He's like, hey, I organized all your books alphabetically. I was bored. So, Red Mars is a book, and we are, like, on page 172. Last week, we met Nadia Ninefingers, who used to be just Nadia. And then she got her hand smashed in a farming accident, no, a rock accident. It was a rock / tractor accident / sledgehammer / bulldozer versus human hand accident. She's, you know, got some issues in her hand now, but she just lost her pinky. Fortunately, you know, not the whole hand. But she got in an accident and lost her pinky. And she's really sad and she has to heal for a while. And since she's like super... Oh, wait, I fucked up the introduction. Okay, wait, we're reading about Red Mars. It's about the colonization of Mars. I don't know what year it's set in, but just think future. And this book is about the first 100 settlers on Mars who are tasked with building the first permanent habitat. In the very first chapter, we kind of had like a cool flash forward where it's like 20 years later and there's actual like I don't know if there's a city or multiple cities, but there's like cities on Mars and they're having like a big celebration and then a bunch of crazy shit happens and someone gets murdered and a race war is started and then it goes back to like day one, where they're like flying out to Mars in the big spaceship known as the Ares. And then they land on Mars and they've got like a moon base where this crazy guy is building a bunker on the moon. And then the rest of them are down on planet Mars, trying to build the first habitat. We are currently reading the story from the perspective of Nadia, although the person narrating the story changes often. Right now we're reading from Nadia's perspective. She's like this great problem solver / construction worker engineer lady from Serbia, working on the Russians' side. And yeah, she gets her hand smashed in a tractor. She gets her hand smashed in a sledgehammer on accident. And then she's really sad that she lost her finger because she works with her hands. And then she goes out on a road trip with the geology team. And she hangs out with her geology friends as they're going to check out the North Pole. So Nadia goes on like her first road trip because all she's done so far is like stay at the base and dig holes. So then she hangs out with all the rock nerds and they go on a nice road trip, and then, you know, they have like a break and like a nice moment. Like she sits with her friend Anne on the sand dunes of Mars, and they get up top of a real big dune and they look at the Martian sunset. And Nadia's like, man, I needed this. It was a shock to feel such a physical response to beauty. A thrill like some kind of sex. And this beauty was so strange, so alien. Nadia had never seen it properly before, or never really felt it. She realized that now. She had been living her life as if it were Siberia made right, living in a huge analogy, understanding everything in terms of her past. But now she stood under a tall violet sky, on the surface of a petrified black ocean, all new, all strange. It was absolutely impossible to compare it to anything she had seen before. And all of a sudden, the past sheared away in her mind, and she turned in circles like a little girl trying to make herself dizzy, without a thought in her head. Weight seeped inward from her skin, and she didn't feel hollow anymore. On the contrary, she felt extremely solid, compact, balanced. A little thinking boulder, set spinning like a top. They glissaded down the steep face of the dune on their boot heels. At the bottom, Nadia gave Anne an impulsive hug. Oh, Anne, I don't know how to thank you for that. Even through the tinted faceplates, she could see Anne grin. A rare sight. After that, things looked different to Nadia. She knew it was in herself, that it was a matter of paying attention in a new way, of looking. But the landscape conspired in this sensation, feeding her new attentiveness, because the very next day they left the Black Dunes and drove on to what her companions called layered or laminate terrain. This was the region of flat sand that in winter would lie under the CO2, or the carbon dioxide. This was the region of flat sand that in winter would lie under the carbon dioxide skirt of the polar cap. Now, in midsummer, it lay revealed, a landscape made entirely of curvilinear patterns. They drove up broad, flat washes of yellow sand that were bounded by long, sinuous, flat-topped plateaus. The sides of the plateaus were stepped and benched, laminated both finely and grossly, looking like wood that had been cut and polished to show a handsome grain. None of them had ever seen any land remotely like it, and they spent the mornings taking samples and borings and hiking around in a loping Martian ballet, talking a blue streak, Nadia as excited as any of them. Anne explained to her that each winter's frost caught a lamina on the surface. Then the wind erosion had cut arroyos and stripped away at their sides, and each stratum was stripped back further than the one below it, so that the arroyo walls consisted of hundreds of narrow terraces. It's like the land is a contour map of itself, Simon said. Mine incorrectly has strata instead of stratum. Nice. Gotta do what Simon says. It's like the land is a contour map of itself, Simon said. They drove during the days and went out every evening. They drove during the days and went out every evening in purpley dusks that lasted until just before midnight. They drilled borings and came up with cores that were gritty and icy, laminated for as far down as they could drill. One evening, Nadia was climbing with Anne up a series of parallel terraces, half listening to her explain about the precession of aphelion and perihelion, when she looked back across the arroyo and saw that it was glowing like lemons and apricots in the evening light, and that above the arroyo were pale green lenticular clouds, mimicking perfectly the terrain's French curves. "Look," she exclaimed. Anne looked back and saw it, and was still. They watched the low banded clouds float overhead. I got chills from that, though. Like, the idea of seeing something. Anyways, they watched the low banded clouds float overhead. Finally, a dinner call from the Rovers brought them back, and walking down over the contoured terraces of sand, Nadia knew that she had changed. That, or else the planet was getting much more strange and beautiful as they traveled north. Or both. They rolled over flat terraces of yellow sand. Sand so fine and hard and clear of rocks that they could go at full speed, slowing down only to shift up or down from one bench to another. Occasionally, the rounded slope between terraces gave them some trouble, and once or twice they even had to backtrack to find a way. But usually, a route north could be found without difficulty. On their fourth day in the laminate terrain, the plateau walls flanking their flat washed... Wait, what? On the fourth day in the laminate terrain, the plateau walls flanking their flat wash curved together, and they drove up the cleavage, nice, onto a higher plane. And there before them on the new horizon was a white hill, a great rounded thing, like a white Ayers rock, a white hill. It was ice, a hill of ice, 100 meters high and 1 kilometer wide. And when they drove around it, they saw that it continued over the horizon to the north. It was the tip of a glacier, perhaps the tongue of the polar cap itself. In other cars, they were shouting, and in the noise and confusion, Nadia could only hear Phyllis crying, "Water, water." Water, indeed. Though they had known it was going to be there, it was still startling, in the extreme, to run into a whole great white hill of it. In fact, the tallest hill they had seen in the entire 5,000 kilometers of their voyage. In fact, the tallest hill they had seen in their 5,000 kilometer voyage. It took them all that first day to get used to it. They stopped the rovers, pointed, chattered, got out to have a look, took surface samples and borings, touched it, climbed up it a ways. Like the sand around it, the ice hill was horizontally laminated, with lines of dust about a centimeter apart. Between the lines, the ice was pocked and granular. In this atmospheric pressure, it sublimed at almost all temperatures, leaving pitted, rotten sidewalls to a depth of a few centimeters. Under that, it was solid and hard. This is a lot of water, they all said at one point or another. Water on the surface of Mars. The next day, the glacier hill formed the right horizon, a wall that ran on beside them for the whole day's drive. Then it really began to seem like a lot of water, especially as over the course of the day the wall got taller, rising to a height of about 300 meters. Kind of white mountain ridge, in fact, walling off their flat-bottomed valley on its east side. And then over the horizon to the northwest, there appeared to be another white hill, the top of another ridge poking over the horizon, the base remaining beneath it. Another glacier hill walling them into the west, some 30 kilometers away. Sorry, I timed them out for 24 hours. Is that a good idea? I couldn't really keep up with what they were saying, but it did not seem related to the book. Okay, good. All right, go to bed. Oh, okay. A lot of water. And then over the horizon to the northwest appeared another white hill, the top of another ridge poking over the horizon, the base remaining beneath it. Another glacier hill, walling them in to the west, some 30 kilometers away. So they were in the Chasma Borealis, a wind-carved valley that cut north into the ice cap for some 500 kilometers, more than half the distance to the pole. The chasm's floor was flat sand, hard as concrete, and often crunchy with a layer of carbon dioxide frost. The chasm's ice walls were tall, but not vertical. They lay back at an angle less than 45 degrees, and like the hillsides in the laminate terrain, they were terraced, the terraces ragged with wind erosion and sublimation. The two forces that over tens of thousands of years had cut the whole length of the chasm. Yay, it's right here. Wait, this isn't it. I have another rock that shows this process even better, but this I'm pretty happy with this actually. Pretty lucky. I don't know where the other rock is, but this is what like they're describing, sort of. Man, I have a rock that's even cooler, but I found both of them in a river. Wonder, do I know where that rock might be at my mom's house. Man, I have this really cool rock that's like kind of like sandy, like it's like sandstone or whatever the fuck that means. It's like really sandy rock, and I found it in a river where the water kept, like the water level would change and erode the layers like really, really finely. And the rock was really crumbly, so it had like an extra effect on it. Yeah, I know it's this type of stone. I don't know if it's the right word for what the stone that I have is. This is a different one, but it has kind of the same effect. And you can, like, some of the lines are so incredibly fine. Like, look at the difference of the layers. They're like almost not there. So I think it's really cool because that's like what they're describing, like the whole, like this, but like like just like huge, you know, like this, but like the size of a mountain. With like an infinite number of layers, like where each ridge was just like barely eroded. It's really cool. With the ice and the sand. There's a couple descriptions. This is probably more what the ice looked like. But I have another rock that looks what the sand would look like. So you can like barely see the, like I can feel it with my finger, but you can barely see it. It's cool. I have a better rock, but I don't know where it is. No, it's not been rubbed smooth. That's the opposite of the lesson I'm trying to teach you. It is a smooth rock. The other one was a better example. I don't know where it is, but it's actually the fact it's been what's interesting about it is that it's been eroded unsmoothly. Like that's not a stain. There are like look, it's terraced. Each level is eroded from the next, you know, from the water level changing, which is what they're describing with the North Pole. Yeah, that's not a stain. That's like the actual height of the rock. You see the rock gets taller in the middle. It's because the water level would change. And that's what they're describing with the pole of Mars, where each season, like in the summer, the ice will recede. And then in the winter, the ice will grow back. And each time it's like disturbing and eroding the sand. And then also the ice itself does that because the ice is growing and then shrinking back. So just imagine like the whole part of the planet that they're standing on looks like this rock, sort of. Like imagine you could stand on it and this was the size of a mountain. But what's really exciting, aside from how exciting all of this is that the scale of the lines would not change. Like it would be this multiplied by 1,000,000. But the size of it wouldn't actually, like some of it would change, but like for the permafrost layer or just like a layer of frost affecting the sand, like there would be like tiny little lines from millions of years. So yeah, imagine it if you can. It's smooth on pretty much every side. This is really smooth because it was in a river, and the river had mostly fast-flowing water going over it, but the water level would slightly change. This rock is really cool. So the water level would lightly change, but overall, this rock was just like constantly being sandblasted by water and sand. So the rock itself is very smooth, but each layer, this probably took like, I don't even know, a year for at least for each layer to be smoothed out. Like, how long was this little part sticking out of the water, but the rest of it was submerged? That, like, there's, like, a top part, and there's... You can see where the water levels were. But the whole rock is very smooth, so we know that this was in water pretty much constantly for years. That's a cool side. It looks like a footprint. So the water level was up to here, and then the water level shrank. This seems to be mostly a sign of the water level shrinking. Interesting. Okay. But who knows? That is a lot of water, they all said at one point or another. So, they were in Chasma Borealis, a wind-carved valley that cut north into the ice cap for some 500 kilometers, more than half the distance to the pole. The chasm's floor was a flat sand, hard as concrete, and often crunchy with a layer of CO2 frost. The chasm's ice walls were tall, but not vertical. They lay back at an angle, less than 45 degrees, and like the hillsides in the laminate terrain, they were terraced. The terraces ragged with wind erosion and sublimation, the two forces that over tens of thousands of years had cut the whole length of the chasm. So, from wind erosion and the evaporation of CO2 and water, changing from liquid to gas and back, and then back again, for millions of years, plus wind. Rather than driving up to the head of the valley, the explorers crossed to the western wall, aiming toward a transponder that had been included in a drop of ice mining equipment. The sand dunes mid-chasm were low and regular, and the rovers rolled over the corrugated land, up and down, up and down. Then, as they crested a sand wave, they spotted the drop. No more than 2 kilometers from the foot of the northwest ice wall. Bulky lime green containers on skeletal landing modules. A strange sight in the world of whites and tans and pinks. "What an eyesore!" Anne exclaimed, but Phyllis and George were cheering. During the long afternoon, the shadowed western ice side took on a variety of pale colors. The purest water ice was clear and bluish, but most of the hillside was a translucent ivory, copiously tinted by pink and yellow dust. Irregular patches of CO2 ice were a bright, pure white. The contrast between dry ice and water ice was vivid and made it impossible to read the actual contours of the hillside. and foreshortening made it hard to tell how tall the hill really was. It seemed to go up forever, and was probably somewhere between 300 and 500 meters above the floor of Borealis. "That is a lot of water," Nadia exclaimed. "And there's more underground," Phyllis said. "Our borings show that the cap actually extends many degrees of latitude farther south than we can see, buried under the layered terrain. So we have more water than we'll ever need." Anne pursed her mouth unhappily. Anne doesn't like the idea of drilling holes or siphoning water. I'm pretty sure Anne wishes she was a Mars robot. Like, she just wants to be a Mars rover and move in a predetermined path and just collect rock samples until her battery dies. Poor girl. They're not there to terraform. They are there to build a settlement. So Anne, like, begrudgingly accepts the bare bones of the project, but she doesn't like thinking about where it's going to, like, lead. Not even where it's going to lead. Like, what do we worry about when we think about colonizing Mars? I worry that Mars is going to end up exactly like Earth, covered in parking lots and fucking department stores. You know, so that's a way you could kind of relate to Anne. I believe most of us, like, we don't want to think of, like, the moon having billboards on it, you know? So that's kind of, but, like, Anne feels that way about, like, the whole thing, you know? But she's there for the science, but she doesn't really like thinking about, like, well, what if everybody votes that they want to terraform Mars? Like, what, like that's not even a question right now. Right now, they're just there to land, do the science, build the habitat. But what will Mars look like 200 years from now? And that's kind of Anne's concern. She's like, don't do anything that we don't have to do. And we're definitely don't need to terraform. But terraforming the whole planet is, like, pretty unrealistic anyways. So they're going to be building, like, domes. Biodomes. And building a biodome is much different from terraforming. So we should terraform? It's kind of a political, philosophical question. Like, I feel like most people, I don't know what your guys' understanding of it is, but, like, most people think of terraforming as, like, an obvious solution, or, like, they think that's what we're gonna do. Terraforming would mean, like, rebuilding the planet. You would be literally rebuilding the entire planet. I don't think most people realize that when they think about terraforming. Like, most people think of terraforming, they're like, oh, we'll just dig lakes and make man-made mountains and lakes, and then we'll grow trees. But it's like, no, you have to build the atmosphere. You have to we will be forming the Terra. Like, it would change the entire surface of the planet, which is also just a ridiculous amount of work. You would have to, like, I don't even know how you would realistically do this with Mars, because that has been an idea, like, rebuild the atmosphere and then regrow everything and make it, like, a livable planet. But what's more realistic is more like building little houses or little terrariums where we can, like if you had to live at the bottom of the ocean, You don't, like, you wouldn't want to drain the ocean so that you could live at the bottom of it. You would want to make a pod to live in, not like, you want to put you in the ocean, not take the ocean out. Yeah, and Mars is pretty much impossible to terraform anyways, although, you know, I'm not up to date on the latest findings, but I'm pretty sure Mars will never be terraformed, ever. But if we tried, even if we tried to terraform it, let alone if we succeeded, it would destroy the historical value of the planet. Like, it would change everything about the surface, and it would destroy everything that Anne finds valuable. So, like, no matter where you land on Mars, you're going to be destroying it already. And Anne is concerned about the extent of that damage. Like, it's easy enough when you land and you make the first footprint. Anne isn't crying about the first footprint. She's crying about the fact that they're going to use all of the ice caps to feed millions, to grow millions of cities. And she's like, she just disagrees about what direction these settlements are going in. And to what extent they feel it is their right to mine the planet, to change its surface, without studying it first. Especially the part about not studying it first. She's like, okay, it's fine that we need to do this right now to survive, but why do you want to start building, why do you want to start, like, drilling here when we don't even know what that is? We don't know where we are right now. So, like, let's spend time to study where we are before we start chopping it up and moving it around. Which, that is the most reasonable essence of her whole argument. And it's kind of sad that they don't have time to stop and do that. And they also don't have people who care as much as she does. She has people who are excited at the idea of doing as much as they can. They want to build, they want to drill, they are excited about what that means to them. Focusing so much on if you could rather than if you should, yeah. So we'll have more water than we'll ever need. Anne pursed her mouth unhappily. The drop of the mining equipment had determined the site of the ice mining camp, the west wall of Chasma Borealis, at longitude 41, latitude 83 north. Deimos had just recently followed Phobos under the horizon. They wouldn't see it again until they returned south of 82 degrees north. The summer nights consisted of an hour's purple twilight, and the rest of the time the sun wheeled around, never more than 20 degrees above the horizon. The 6 of them spent long hours outside, moving the ice miner to the wall and then setting it up. The main component was a robotic tunnel borer, about the size of one of their rovers. The borer cut into the ice and passed... The borer cut into the ice and passed back cylindrical drums, 1.5 meters in diameter. When they turned the borer on, it made a loud, low buzz, which was louder still if they put their helmets to the ice, or even touched it with their hands. After a while, white ice drums thumped into a hopper, and then a small robot forklift carried them into a distillery, which would melt the ice and separate out its considerable loads of dust, then refreeze the water into 1-meter cubes, more suitable for packing in the holds of the rovers. Robot freight rovers would then be perfectly capable of driving to the site, loading up, and returning to base all on their own. And base would then have a regular water supply, larger than they could ever use. Around 4 or 5 trillion cubic kilometers in the visible polar cap, Edvard calculated, though there were a lot of guesses in the calculation. They spent several days testing the miner and deploying an array of solar panels to power it. In the long evenings after dinner, Anne would climb the ice wall, ostensibly to take more borings. Although Nadia knew that she just wanted away from Phyllis and Edvard and George. And naturally, she wanted to climb all the way to the top, to get on the polar cap and look around, and take borings of the most recent layers of ice. And so one day, when the miner had passed all the test routines, she and Nadia and Simon got up at dawn, just after 2 a.m., and went out into the super cold morning air and climbed, their shadows like big spiders climbing before them. The slope of the ice was about 30 degrees, steepening, and then letting off time after time as they ascended the rough benches in the hill's layered side. It was 7 a.m. when the slope laid back, and they walked onto the surface of the polar cap. To the north was a plain of ice that extended as far as they could see, to a horizon some 30 kilometers away. Looking back to the south, they could see a great distance over the geometric swirls of the layered terrain. It was the longest view Nadia had ever had on Mars. The ice of the plateau was layered much like the laminated sand below them, with wide bands of dirty pink contouring across much cleaner stuff. The other wall of Chasma Borealis lay off to the east, looking almost vertical from their point of view. Long, tall, massive. So much water, Nadia said again. It's more than we'll ever need. That depends, Anne said absently, screwing the frame of the little borer into the ice. Her darkened faceplate turned up at Nadia. If the terraformers have their way, this will all go like dew on a hot morning. Into the air to make pretty clouds. Wow, I haven't read this far, actually. I just got excited about it. This is all new to me. I figured she'd talk about it. I just didn't think literally in the next paragraph. This is so much more water than we'll ever need. Well, that depends, Anne said absently, screwing the frame of the little borer into the ice. Her darkened faceplate turned up at Nadia. If the terraformers have their way, this will all go like dew on a hot morning, into the air to make pretty clouds. Would that be so bad? Nadia asked. Anne stared at her. Through the tinted faceplate, her eyes looked like ball bearings. That night at dinner, she said, "We really ought to make a run up to the pole." Phyllis shook her head. "We don't have the food or air." "Call for a drop." Edvard shook his head. "The polar cap is cut by valleys almost as deep as Borealis." "Not so," Anne said. "You could drive straight to it. The swirl valleys look dramatic from space, but that's because of the difference in albedo between the water and the CO2. The actual slopes are never more than 6 degrees off the horizontal. It's just more layered terrain, really. George said, but what about getting onto the cap in the first place? We drive around to one of the tongues of ice that drop to the sand. They're like ramps up to the central itself, or up to the central massif. And once there, we drive right to the pole. There's no reason to go, Phyllis said. It'll just be more of what we see here. And it means more exposure to radiation. And, George added, we could use what food and air we do have to check out some of the sites that we passed on the way up here. So that was their point. Anne scowled. I'm the head of the Geological Survey, she said sharply. Which may have been true, but she was a horrible politician, especially compared to Phyllis, who had any number of friends in Houston and Washington. But there's no geological reason to go to the pole, Phyllis said now with a smile. It'll be the same ice as here. You just want to go on. Or you just want to go. Well, Anne said, say I do. There are still scientific questions to be answered up there. Is the ice the same composition? How much dust? Everywhere we go up here, we collect valuable data. But we're up here to get water. We're not up here to fool around. It's not fooling around, Anne snapped. We obtain water to allow us to explore. We don't explore just to obtain water. You've got it backwards. I can't believe how many people in this colony do that. Nadia said, let's see what they say at base. They might want us to help with something there, or they might not be able to send a drop. You never know. Anne groaned. We'll end up asking permission from the UN, I swear. She was right. Frank and Maya didn't like the idea. John was interested, but non-committal. Arkady supported it when he heard of it and declared that he would send a supply drop from Phobos if necessary, which, given its orbit, was impractical at best. But at that point, Maya called mission control in Houston and Bacaner, and the argument rippled outward. Hastings opposed the plan, but Bacaner and a lot of the scientific community liked it. Finally, Anne got on the phone, her voice very curt and arrogant, though she looked scared. I'm the geological head here, and I say it needs to be done. There won't be any better opportunity to get on-site data on the original condition of the polar cap. It's a delicate system, and any change in the atmosphere is going to impact it heavily. And you've got plans to do that, right? Sachs, are you still working on those windmill heaters? Sachs had not been part of the discussion, and he had to be called to the phone. Sure, he said when the question was repeated. He and Hiroko had come up with the idea of manufacturing small windmills to be dropped from dirigibles all over the planet. The constant westerlies would spin the windmills, and the spin would be converted to heat in coils on the base of the mills, and this heat would simply be released into the atmosphere. Sachs had already designed a robotic factory to manufacture the windmills. He had already designed a robotic factory to manufacture the windmills. He hoped to make them by the thousands. It's only untouched once. That's a great way to put it, Emmerich. I can't believe Sachs is building windmills. No. I'm very invested in Anne's argument here. They're totally gonna blow it. They're totally gonna blow it. It's like, sure, we terraformed Mars, but at what cost? Very interested in this debate. The windmills. He had already designed a robotic factory to make the windmills, and he hoped to make them by the thousands. Vlad pointed out that the heat gained would come at the price of winds slowed down. You couldn't get something for nothing. Sachs immediately argued that this would be a side benefit, given the severity of the global dust storms that the wind sometimes caused. A little heat for a little wind is a great trade-off. So, 1,000,000 windmills, Anne said. Now. So, 1,000,000 windmills, Anne said now. And that's just the start. You talked about spreading black dust on the polar caps, did you not, Sachs? Or didn't you? Oh, didn't you, Sachs? It would thicken the atmosphere faster than practically any other action we could take. So, if you get your way, Anne said, the caps are doomed. They'll evaporate, and we're going to say, I wonder what they were like. And we won't know. Do you have enough supplies? Enough time? John asked. We'll drop you supplies, Arkady said again. There's 4 months of summer. There's 4 more months of summer, Anne said. You just want to go to the pole, Frank said, echoing Phyllis. So, Anne replied, you may have come here to play office politics, but I plan to see a bit of this place. Nadia grimaced. That ended the line of conversation, and Frank would be angry. Which was never a good idea. Anne. The next day, the Terran offices weighed in with the opinion that the polar cap ought to be sampled in its original condition. No objections from base, though Frank did not get back on the line. Simon and Nadia cheered. North to the pole! Phyllis just shook her head. I don't see the point. George and Edvard and I will stay back here as backup. And we'll make sure the ice miner is running right. Is working right. Yes. Phyllis just shook her head. I don't see the point. George and Edvard and I will stay down here as backup and make sure that the ice miner is working right.